Hello, my name is C J Hollins. I'm a modern artist. This video is going to outline the idea behind my work. I make strange objects like this. These are some of the drawings I make of each work I build. The final objects are made from wood and are painted in bright, flat colour. Each work is an attempt to make something you will find difficult to recognise. Why do I make work like this? Why don't I uphold the traditional appearance of a painting? To understand modern art, you have to think beyond painting, sculpture, music and dance. Art is not an object, but a feeling that has no recognisable form. Painting, sculpture, music and dance are objects left behind after the artist has tried to give this feeling structure. As these objects were being made, they gave the artist a way to channel the feeling from their mind out towards the world of shapes and form. But it is this feeling that we need to understand, not the objects that are left behind. The artist tries to give the feeling recognition, but the object cannot do this. What confuses people who are not artists is that they come along and look at these objects and they call them art, because they do not know what the feeling is that the artist has tried to discover by creating the work. People think the object itself is art, and they cannot understand an object that does not look like other objects that are classed as art. An art object is like a footprint that has been left in the sand. The object shows us where the artist has walked, but all that is left for us to look at is an empty outline from which we have to try to reconstruct what this feeling called art was like. To reconstruct this feeling called art, we need to think about what an object presents to us when we stand in front of it. What does such an object reveal? If we look at a traditional picture, we can see it presents us with a controlled and organised image of the way we have learned to see the world around us. A picture gives us the same feeling we experience when we look out upon the real world. We look and we see objects we know how to recognise. If we are by the sea, we might see clouds, a lighthouse and a harbour, and we will hear sounds and see movement. None of these things disturb us because we have learned to recognise them. Our mind takes what we experience all around us and gives us a controlled and organised view of the sights, shapes, sounds and movement we experience. We do the same thing when we look at a picture. Here is a nice picture of a landscape. It is full of images we know how to recognise. To identify what we see, we use our knowledge of the real world to turn a flat canvas, covered in paint, into a picture. To allow us to do this, the artist has looked at the world, recognised the shapes and colours of the objects, and carefully arranged the paint on the canvas to reflect what we know how to recognise. We come along and we use the same powers of recognition to turn the careful arrangement of paint into a picture we can understand. We do the same thing with sculpture, music and dance. An artist turns an arrangement of day-to-day shapes, sounds and movement into a controlled and organised experience. We come along and use our ability to sense this feeling of control and organisation to recognise what the artist has done. Up until modern art, all artists followed this procedure. As a result, all traditional art reflects how we recognise control and organisation in our perception of sight, shape, sound and movement. The reason I am pointing this out to you is because I want you to consider what happens when you fail to recognise this control and organisation in what you experience. I want you to become aware of the feeling we all encounter when we come across something we do not know how to recognise. I want you to do this because the founding principle of modern art was an attempt to find a way to look at how we experience the world before intelligence controls our powers of perception. If you think of art in this way, you can realise that anything you can easily recognise, like this picture, gives us a feeling controlled by intelligence. But anything we fail to recognise, like this modern art object, begins to provoke a feeling generated by instinct. Why do I want you to think of art this way? To answer this question, we have to digress a little into the science of biology. Our view of how we became human beings here on Earth is now understood to have come about because of evolution. Evolution adapts life on Earth to an ever-changing environment through a process called natural selection. This biological understanding of how life evolves tells us we have emerged from animal origins, and we will have developed an intelligent power of perception from animal sensations. It is essential for a modern artist to understand this idea, because it implies we possess two ways of perception. Evolution has endowed us with two different ways of sensing the objects and events around us, but we will have learned to use only the one most successful of these ways of perception. This one successful perception is generated by intelligence, and it now works to stop us sensing in the other, older animal way. Now, I believe this animal way of perception is what artists feel within their experience of the world around us. Artists are more attuned to sensing it because they are involved in altering how we recognise sight, shape, sound and movement when they create an art object. The problem is that artists cannot just avoid control and organisation when creating art, because when they do this, they are faced with uncertainty and confusion. What this reveals is that our mind has evolved to block out the old inherent way of perception. We can understand this by comparing a recognisable picture with an abstract. Here are two paintings. The landscape has been painted with intelligent control and organisation to reflect the picture we know how to recognise. The other is an abstract. It has been painted to avoid any recognisable image. What should happen when we look at the abstract is that we should be able to sense it through our old animal powers of perception, because this abstract does not present an image our intelligence can recognise. It has been created by an artist who has stopped his intelligence dominating the act of painting and allowed instinct to guide his hand. We should sense this object by instinct, but we do not. What we find is that we, just like the artist, seem unable to comprehend the feeling generated by the work. Instead, because we find our powers of recognition are removed from what we see, we feel a loss of control and organisation within our intelligent way of perception. We fail to comprehend the sensation generated by instinct, and in its place we resort to trying to overcome the feeling of loss by searching for some form of recognition in what we see. We will often try to imagine shapes like figures or phases or alien landscapes in the runs and dribbles of paint. Doing this stops the feeling of instinct from emerging into our mind. Intelligence now organises our perception because it is more successful than the animal sense of instinct. But that instinct is still inherent within us. Our intelligence now dominates our mind, and this makes it difficult to look through the deeper emotive sense of awareness we still possess. It is this depth of perception an artist should be capable of discerning. If you assert that you are an artist, you are saying you are a person who is more sensitive to an emotive way of perception. But the problem you will face is that you will be unable to form an image of this way of knowing objects and events. If you try to do this through your intelligence, you will transform the view into something that you have learned to recognise. This is what our intelligence makes us do, because this way of sensing the world around us has evolved to suppress the view we lived with in our animal past. If an artist does not understand this idea, the artist will allow their intelligence to dominate the act of creating art, and the object will just reflect control and organisation. It will show us sights, shapes, sounds and movements we can easily recognise. If, on the other hand, the artist is aware of this way of perception inherent from our past, they will try to find ways to create work that allows instinct to dictate the forms. Such art will look strange and unrecognisable because we don't know how to comprehend the animal view. Such work will be an attempt to stop our intelligence dominating what we see, so that we can then feel the underlying sensation of an instinctive way of knowing the world around us. Intelligence will always try to block out this old feeling by making us transform it into something we know how to recognise. Most artists will show us work we can easily identify, but a few, more sensitive than most, will feel this old inherent way of perception. They will create work that is difficult to recognise, because only then, when we are in this state of uncertainty, do we begin to sense what confronts us in a truly inherent way.